without the phone being on. All right, good evening, everybody. I just sat here and talked for a couple of minutes and the phone was on. That's always frustrating. Good evening, everybody. Tonight I want to talk about an abstract concept that applies to dealing with people in the most generic sense. In the slightly more specific sense, it applies to leadership, but really it applies more to the illicit maintenance of power, the illicit maintaining of power, more than legitimate leadership, at least in my opinion, because it's a tool that is very easy to abuse. It is a tool that lends itself to abuse. That may or may not be true. I mean, there's not really very many things in the world that do not have the potential to be used for both good and evil. So it's tough for me to say that it lends itself to abuse. But anyway, it's frequently used. I guess in leadership to stave off people trying to rise to power through illicit means, deception, manipulation, things like that. So anyway, the tool, the tactic, or the concept, the abstract concept is known as controlling the narrative. In my mind, it applies to all of those things that I just listed, but I'm thinking of it specifically in terms of the geocentric versus heliocentric debate. And as a caveat, there are some people who will say that geocentrism doesn't have to be flat Earth, that geocentrism can be the spherical Earth where the universe spins around that Earth. And I don't accept that. Premise. Geocentrism precedes the heliocentric model by thousands of years. I just think that the heliocentric model, the people that defend it, promote it, evangelize for it, they try to absorb true geocentrism, specifically as a means of controlling the narrative, ironically enough, since controlling the narrative is what we're talking about. So I don't accept that premise, that geocentrism comes in two forms. I accept the fact that it comes in two forms, but I just believe that one of those forms is an illicit, contrived, fabricated form. So, or fabricated isn't really the right word, more like corrupted. It's like an illicit, contrived, corrupted form of its true definition. So, but controlling the narrative is an abstract concept that I believe is difficult to explain. It's difficult to explain like institutional compartmentalization. That's also difficult to explain. But I gained a level of comfort and peace with the idea of explaining institutional compartmentalization when I started exploring the whole concept of a secret society, and that at the lowest levels, most secret societies, at every level, secret societies are highly compartmentalized institutionally, and that at the lowest level, their entire purpose, mission statement point is to simply normalize secrecy. And as the most polite way of describing it, the more poignant way of describing it would be to create an army of sociopaths. Because, in my opinion, anybody who lives life in such a way that for them secrecy is normalized, I consider them to be a sociopath to some degree. I mean, I think that's just my opinion. So that's institutionalized compartmentalization. That's kind of an abstract idea that I have found a more or less concrete way of explaining. So at the first level of these secret societies, their only purpose for existence is to normalize secrecy. They don't have any idea what goes on at the higher levels. They don't care, because they keep them so busy with rituals and meetings and activities and galas to raise money for the children's hospital and volunteer events and parades and yada yada yada, parties, and just social activities, and but of course the secrecy is a part of all of that. So they're normalizing secrecy. Now you have an army of sociopaths that are accustomed to living a life of secrecy or embracing secrecy as a lifestyle. Now you can work with that. You can do things with that you couldn't do with the population at large, because eventually you'd have somebody stand up and say, wait a minute, what are we doing here? This doesn't make any sense. And then you have to explain why you can't talk about this, blah 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 blah, and then you'd have argument, why can't I talk about it? Why can't no, the secrecy has to be a foregone conclusion. It has to be a given. Once you have that given established, then you can start to do some things, some illicit things, and that's what happens at the higher levels. The higher and the higher and the higher, the more illicit the illicitness becomes. So that's institutionalized compartmentalization, abstractness made a little bit more concrete. This idea about controlling the narrative is equally abstract. So how do you make it concrete? I don't know. I don't think I don't feel that comfortable with the idea that I've come up with a way to do that. But I'm going to talk about it anyway, because sometimes you just have to take a stab at something before you are able to take a meaningful stab, I guess you could say. So for me, controlling the narrative is akin to, for example, people living in a town where there is a patch of woods outside the town, and somebody comes along and says, hey, there's a purple dragon living in those woods. Okay? Now, there's no purple dragon living in the woods, or there may be. It really doesn't matter. That part doesn't matter. But let's just say we're living in the real world, and there is no purple dragon living in the woods. But if you can control the narrative, you created this narrative out of thin air, right? Now, if you can control the narrative, now you can do things with that narrative. So people say, why would people lie about heliocentrism? Well, because you can do things with a narrative. I mean, that's how everything is done. Everything is done with a narrative, So, in the case of the purple dragon, where you could control people's paths of travel, right? You never. Now, it's important to remember that you never have absolute control. Nobody has absolute control ever, right? People kid themselves. They fool themselves into thinking that they have absolute control, and they go from being sociopaths to perhaps psychopaths, or maybe they just become stronger and more explicit sociopaths, But and they fool other people into thinking that they have total control. But as time goes on, it becomes more and more evident that they don't have total control. They never had total control. It was just an illusion, So it's important to remember that. But if you can, when I say control people's paths of travel, I don't necessarily mean in an absolute 100% fashion. But nevertheless, you are, so influence might be a better word than control. So just keep that in mind, that maybe what I really mean is influence. But I'm going to keep using the word control because it's more explicit. It makes for easier conversation. So you can control people's paths of travel, obviously, right? I mean, if you are successful in convincing people that there's a purple dragon living in those woods, well, now just that very fact, you've already influenced the people's paths of travel. Now, if in fact controlling people's paths of travel is an interest that you have, maybe you own a bridge, and you want more people to use your bridge because it's a toll bridge, or maybe you want more people to use your bridge because you're a bridge builder and it's just a matter of professional pride, or you want more people to use your bridge because if nobody uses your bridge, you have no notoriety. Nobody knows who you are, and nobody cares who built that bridge because nobody uses the bridge, right? But if everybody starts using the bridge, eventually people are going to say, well, who built this bridge? Your bridge is going to need repairs. You get to charge money to repair the bridge. Your name becomes a brand because people start to talk about you. Once your name becomes a brand, well, then you can get contracts to build other bridges. So there's always interest surrounding a narrative. Good narratives, bad narratives, true narratives, false narratives. There are always interest. So there's the bottom line with controlling a narrative, is that there are always interest. Good interest, positive interest, a legitimate interest. The need for control. Control isn't really the right word. At least not in the sense that I'm using it. It's just, it's just you're filling a need, I guess you could say. And you're being reimbursed legitimately for filling that need. Illegitimately, which is what I'm talking about when I say control the narrative today, is when you lie, you invent an imaginary need, or you contrive a need, you create a need where one would not naturally exist without your manipulation, and then you profit from that need. You profit from curing the need that you created that would have never existed had you not manipulated something to cause it to exist. So the need becomes a narrative in and of itself, right? So Purple Dragon in the woods, you're a bridge builder or whatever your interest may be. Now this is where it gets interesting, because to sustain your control of a narrative, what do you need? Eventually you're going to need mastery. You're going to need mastery of human dynamics, if nothing else. But things might also develop such that you require some type of technical mastery, Maybe you require mastery of something like history, Maybe in order to keep your narrative under your control, your narrative of this purple dragon, maybe you need to learn about the history of dragons, and maybe your study of the history of dragons causes you to learn a great deal about the history of, taxonomy, Maybe as you learn more about taxonomy, you learn more about history, because all the various cultures approach the subject of the study of taxonomy from a slightly different angle, And as you learn more about that, you learn more about culture. So maybe in the process of controlling your narrative, you know, you actually become an extraordinarily masterful person of an array of interrelated fields of study. You know, so a great deal of legitimate information, okay, begins to embellish this illegitimate narrative. And I think that that's fascinating. I think it's fascinating how you can be a legitimate master of something and yet you're devoted to an illegitimate cause. Or you're a legitimate master of an array of things and your mastery, nevertheless, is devoted to an illegitimate narrative, to an illegitimate cause. I think that's pretty interesting. So, I mean, another example we might of controlling the narrative, or an example of being a master, a legitimate master of an array of things that are devoted to an illegitimate cause. Perhaps we could say that is an example of that is a magician, right? A magician is a master of his trade, you know. I mean, he masters, the muscle memory that's required to do things in a very precise and effortless way, you know. He's a master of technical challenges, whether it's trapdoors or human anatomy or light, the way light bends and bounces and whatever. I mean, there's some chemical stuff involved. I mean, every magician has a slightly different angle on things, but there's some magicians that are strictly TV magicians, and they've mastered the television medium. There are magicians that are like really good at close-up stuff, one-on-one card tricks, and just all kind of stuff. All various kinds of things. And their stuff doesn't really work from 100 yards away, so they're not really that good for TV, for example, or they're not good in a room full of a couple thousand people, and vice versa. I mean, there are magicians that are really good at stage magic, but they're not necessarily that good at one-on-one close-up, parlor type tricks. So they legitimately master legitimate arts and fields of study, but their mastery is of an array of subjects is devoted to the cause of deception. Now, with a magician, obviously, it's all fun and entertainment, and everybody knows that. But so I'm not trying to imply that magicians are illegitimate in their trade, their craft. Just using them as an example of this one, kind of subject. So, with respect to the heliocentric, the question is, why would they deceive? Well, it's because they want somebody at some point in time, some time ago, decided that they wanted to control the narrative. There's a story about one of the scientists who was involved in this debate at the very high levels when they were presenting all of this to the Catholic Church, and everything was very heated and very, strained. And I'm not sure if it was Brahe or was it Kepler, one of them, but he died under very, very suspicious circumstances. And it was theorized, it was thought at the time, and it's thought to this day, that he was murdered by his competition. So you can see how serious people become about these narratives, I mean, if my narrative is X and your narrative is B, or I'm sorry, Y, if your narrative, mine is X and yours Y, if my X is a narrative that's committed to goodness, to right, to truth, well, then killing you in order to have my narrative win the debate, win the day, and win the funding, and win the branding, and win the reputation, and win the notoriety, and win the fame, and win the place in the history books, etc., 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 then killing you would be very, it would be very contradictory. It would be nonsensical when taking the fact that my narrative is good into account, devoted to truth and goodness and justice. So I think it's safe to assume that whoever killed this guy, if in fact he was murdered, was not a person who represented a narrative that was devoted to goodness and truth. It wouldn't make any sense. And it just so happened that the guy that was killed was the guy who was arguing for the geocentric cosmology, the flat Earth cosmology. So now we know that NASA gets somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million a day, $50 million a day, to promote the heliocentric model, to present it to the world as fact. And outside of NASA, there really is no competition. I mean, there is no establishment or established, either one, point of view. I mean, that's it. You're hearing one side of the debate. They basically kill the competition. If any competition comes up, they kill it, Or, for example, in the case of Elon Musk, they handpick who's allowed to be quote-unquote famous. I mean, come on, it's not as if, far from it, it's very far from it, it's not as if the people at NASA are the only people that know how to make rockets. I mean, there's tons of people in the world that know how to make rockets. There's probably 100,000 people in the world, maybe 500,000, It's not as if the people at NASA are the only people in the world that know how to interpret what they see in the sky. But everything we see is from NASA. So it's a brand. They've branded themselves. They control the narrative. They've created the brand. They saw a need, they filled it, and they control the narrative, they control the brand. Now they get $50 million a day. Now you can think about what you can do with $50 million a day. I mean, it's not the most money in the world. I think it works out to be like $3 billion a year, if I'm not mistaken. Certainly there are companies that make more than that. But I mean, it's substantial. I mean, back in the day when NASA was respected, universally, which they're still respected, but they're not universally. I'm not even sure they're respected, to be honest with you. But Obama just did some things with them that was, he made them the Muslim outreach agency, which is completely. I mean, how do you I don't know how that worked, and I don't think it did work, but now Trump is funding them, promoting them, pushing them, but Trump is said to be a fan of the flat earth, of the geocentric cosmology. The thing is, there is space. There is a need for a rocket program. If all of this geocentric stuff is true, even within that cosmology, there is that need. The thing is, we don't know what that need is exactly in precise terms. Certainly isn't the Hollywood version where people are floating around in a vacuum, wearing little suits, with little wrenches turning little bolts on. I mean, no. I mean, that's I don't have to see very many bubbles in a spacewalk video before I start to say, hey, something isn't right here. And if you have to see more than 2 or 3, then I would seriously question, how sincere you are about caring about the truth, And, obviously there's no bubbles in space. That doesn't make any sense. You have to have water or some kind of a liquid to have bubbles. It just so happens that astronauts practice their spacewalks underwater. So, there's something wrong with the Hollywood version, and you can't really distinguish between the Hollywood version and NASA version. They're pretty much the same. They use the same techniques. They have the same storyline, the same narrative. I mean, it's all the same. So, I forgot what I was saying. So NASA, Hollywood. Oh, there's still a need for the rocket program. What that need is exactly, we don't know with precision. There are things floating around in the sky. How they float, if in fact it is true that the attractive force of the Earth on things suspended in air is not gravity, is not based on an inherent, unidentified attraction of things that have mass to other things that have mass. If in fact that's not true, and if in fact it is true that the attraction is electromagnetic or magnetic electric, we say magnetic electric as opposed to electric magnetic because it is thought that the first force in the universe is magnetism and not electricity. Of course, when you have magnetism and you put it in motion through mass, that is what creates electricity. So that's why your alternator in the car has magnets inside that spin around, because when you move magnets, you create electricity. So we say magnetic electric. If in fact the attraction is magnetic electric in nature, then it would kind of make sense that the further away you get from the magnetic electric force, the less the attractive force would be. So we can have things that are quote unquote floating around in the sky. They're just very high, and yet they are still inside the dome that covers the Earth like a terrarium, like a giant terrarium. Again, where we are the science experiment, we are not the experimenters, we are the experiment. We imitate the people who do the experiment because we bear their mark. We are made in their image. Isn't that what the Bible said? Isn't that what the Bible says? Man is made in our image. People say that word, plural form of that pronoun, means the 3 persons of the Trinity. And it may be. I'm not trying to say I'm not trying to say what's right. I'm just exploring options, which I think is what our responsibility is. I think we exceed, or we go above our responsibility when we start saying that it's our responsibility to determine truth. And I think we're supposed to explore, and we're supposed to come to the best conclusions that we can. We can call it truth if we want to, as long as we always are aware of the fact that there's an asterisk on that word, meaning that it's our best shot at truth. It's our best attempt. You know, that's our obligation. That's our duty. It's to make our best effort in finding the truth. We don't have the power, to stand up and say this is absolute truth. You know, we're childlike imitators of our Father. We're not duplicates. You know, we're not proxy gods. We're childlike imitators. You know, so that's what I think about that. So we can have these things. I forgot what I was talking about. I apologize. We can have these things floating around in the sky. Something about truth. Something about. I'm tired. Can you tell? Something about rocket program. Something about things. Something about the attractive force, magnetic attractive force being weak when you're far from the source. I got off on some tangent. Got lost. But so there isn't. I mean, there is that need for the dome. I was talking about the dome. Oh, in the Bible talking. Yeah, we're made. Okay, so we're made in the image of God. We're made in their image, not His image. We're made in their image. You know. So the idea is that we're the experiment, and that there is a master race, if you will. Hitler perverted the truth. He made a mockery of that truth. But